Well, hi, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jodi Hughes. With me today is Laura Cook. Laura is a leadership change and personal success consultant. She's also a very close personal friend of mine. I've had the incredible pleasure of knowing Laura since we were about 9 years old. And over that time, I've been able to watch Laura grow her business most recently, but also grow as a person. And that statement is a pretty big one because ever since we were young kids, I've known Laura to be one of the most insightful and intuitive people that I've ever known. So to say that she's continuing to improve is, in my opinion, mind-blowing. It's like saying that you've just witnessed an absolutely breathtaking sunset become even more beautiful right before your eyes. Now, Laura is currently a Dare to Lead facilitator, a certified facilitator for that program, and that is something that allows her to lead individuals and companies on a journey of growth and helping them to find their pathway to success. It's all based on research by Dr. Brené Brown. And as a part of that program and part of the research that Dr. Brené Brown has done, it's teaching people how to be vulnerable and get in touch with their vulnerabilities. So we thought that maybe the best way to put that vulnerability to the test is to put Laura in that vulnerability hot seat today. And so I get the opportunity to interview Laura and have her share her personal journey. Now, Laura, tell us a little bit about what got you interested in leadership coaching.
Oh, good question. I think that part of my career journey has been experiencing leadership styles from many different types of leaders. I've worked in many different companies for so many different leaders and organizations, and I've seen more of what not to do than what to do. And so I've just become so passionate about doing it better, because I think with like an inch of improvement from a leader's perspective, employees will go so far for you. They will go the extra mile. They will work their butt off. You will have loyalty from them with just a little bit of effort. And so it was so frustrating for me when I would see leaders falling short over and over again. And so I became passionate about it from that standpoint.
And what is it that you think gets in people's way? I mean, I'm certainly not in your field, but in my life experience, I would often suggest that people get in their own way. Is that something that you're observing as well? Maybe they just don't have enough tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is fear. Because thinking back to early on in my career when I was a leader for the first time and I had to have a difficult performance discussion with somebody, I lost sleep over it. My heart was racing. I was having such anxiety over having the conversation. And so I think that anxiety or fear often holds us back from saying what needs to be said. And so that one time that I pushed myself forward, took some deep breaths, took that person aside into a private setting, had the conversation, and it turned around, then you learn that the fear is worth it. And it goes away the more that you're willing to lean into it.
What kinds of fields did you work in prior to starting your own business?
Lots of different. So telecom companies, I've worked in the energy sector, I've worked for a few post-secondary institutions, agriculture, utilities. I've seen a lot of industries.
And I'm only guessing here from my own personal life experience, but I would suggest that maybe a lot of the failings in leaders, it doesn't matter the industry, that it's probably fairly consistent, the failures that you saw throughout the industries that you worked in.
Yeah, I don't think industry drives whether the leaders are strong. I think whether that organization has a strong sense of values that are actually measured in performance and rewarded, if reflected, makes the biggest difference versus what kind of industry it is.
What kinds of values are the most important that they have laid out? I mean, some of them you would think are obvious, but maybe that's the problem. They're not obvious, and you do need to have them laid out.
I think values are very unique to each organization. So typically within the energy sector, you'll see a strong value around safety. And so the behaviors that need to model safety are different than a tech innovation company where innovation and taking risks might be more a value for them. So it doesn't matter what the organizational values are to ensure a strong connection to them. What matters is that you're measuring them. And what also matters is that the employees working for that organization, their personal values align with the organizational values, because the biggest sense of discomfort and disconnect will happen when your personal values are not aligned with that of the organization you're working for. And I've experienced that firsthand.
And so what do you do in that case? I mean, what if they don't? Can you always guarantee that you can find that common ground? Is it maybe an issue with communication, or is it maybe one of those moments that people should take a look at and suggest that maybe that's not the right industry?
I think, for example, if an employee values integrity, and the organization values results, and so the results become more important than how we do things, it's that we get them done, not how we do things, that employee is going to start feeling uncomfortable about the how versus the process by which, or the manner by which we achieve those results. So I think in that case, the employee can try to push the needle a little bit in terms of, being that voice of, hey, maybe we need to rethink this. But I think ultimately in the end, if you're met with complete closed doors, then you're going to have to move on.
So who is it that often comes to you for leadership consulting? Is it people and companies that are aware they have a problem, or is it people and companies that are coming to you before problems have started to evolve?
I think it's a little bit of both. So there's one organization I worked with where the leader was having some conflict within his team. And so he wanted me to come in and offer Dare to Lead as a way to have that common language and kind of flush out some of those sources of conflict. But there's other organizations who are committed to growth, and so they want a common framework by which they can use the same language and tools to move forward. It's obvious to say that we have a huge focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging right now based on what's happening in the world. And so leaning into those conversations and having open, honest, messy, yet critical conversations is something that many organizations are now finally making a priority. So in order to do that, you need to have a safe space. You need to have a way of ensuring that all voices are heard. And so I can sometimes provide that framework, and we call it a container. So in what's a safe container by which we can have these conversations.
How does that work if an employee comes to you and they have some concerns with their company? How do you as a facilitator present that to a leader and not have them be offended or be upset or fight back?
I have had people ask, how do I now bring this to my leader? Because I want them to experience this as well. So sometimes I'm working with frontline leaders and their senior leadership team isn't in the room, and they love the training and what they've learned, but they want to be able to use the tools with their leadership and have them included in those conversations. And so quite often I work with whoever it is that has brought me in to say, hey, here are some things or nuances that I've heard, without without disclosing the confidentiality that I've been trusted with, but to say, here are some things that I've heard or some themes, here's what I would recommend we do about that.
It seems to me like companies are understanding more and more that you do need to, like, that the old model isn't necessarily the most successful one when it comes to hierarchy, and sometimes there seems to be a barrier in communication. So it seems like this is the way that a lot of companies are going, but it also seems like it's a pretty big shift for some companies and for some people. How do you get them along in that journey? It can't be an easy, sometimes your workshops, you can work with companies for a long time, but sometimes your workshops are very, a couple of days. So how do you ensure that they're taking that message and utilizing it?
Yeah, so the most important thing is connecting to the why. So why are we entering into this together, and what do we want to get out of it? And so if we have leaders who don't identify with that why, who are closed down to the idea of the concepts that are provided, then it becomes something that the organization needs to look at. And so quite often when we open, we ensure that the highest, most senior leader sponsoring the effort says some words about why it's important. And so if we're seeing that there's some resistance there, then what we can do is to offer some ideas about, okay, I've noticed some resistance, here's some things you can do. It's usually a conversation. Again, what we measure is rewarded and demonstrated. So are we going to now start tying some of this into our performance? But a lot of the resistance comes from fear as well. And so it's acknowledging and addressing that fear in a safe place. So yes, you're a valuable member, and yes, we respect your opinion, and yes, you have a say, but here's a new way that we want to be able to innovate, because we need more voices at the table and not just one.
This is very subjective. I mean, you're saying it's measurable, but it's also subjective. How do you measure it?
How do you measure courageous leadership?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you ask, because there's actually an assessment that we use at the beginning of our Dare to Lead program that actually measures with data how the team that you are training is showing up at work. And so it is a little bit subjective, but if you see that 90% of the participants are saying we have a problem with trust, you've got a problem with trust. So
yeah,
that's where you can
should be pretty clear.
Yeah, that's where you can hone in and say, okay, senior leader, here's what we're seeing. Here's your data. Here's a case for focusing on this, and I can give you some tools to help build trust, right? So it is subjective, but at the same time, it shows up very, very quickly and very apparently, especially when you see the spread of data. So if we have 80% of participants saying we trust leadership and we demonstrate trust, and then one person is over here, it's going to help us see maybe where some nuances are.
Makes sense to me. Tell me about yourself. Are you, I have the advantage of knowing you, but, potential clients and current clients don't know you to the level that I necessarily have. So if you had to describe yourself to somebody, how would you do that?
Well, I think we're all doing our own work. So I don't profess to be an expert or the model citizen for all of the things that I facilitate, but I am committed to the journey. And I think what's important in terms of my approach is I'm calm and diplomatic. And I think what that does is create safety for people fairly quickly when I'm in a room with them. And I'm willing to share where I am struggling, or examples of where I've faced some of these problems that I'm trying to help solve, and even the times that I don't show up properly. But learning from my own journey, being willing to disclose some of the things that I'm struggling with helps create that trust and safety in the room. And I think my calm and diplomatic approach also helps.
And what about you as a person outside of business? How would you describe yourself?
Well, see, so entering into this interview, I was a bit fearful because my armor is business Laura, and everything beyond that. So I'm trying to marry my two identities a little bit more. I'm a bit goofy. I love having fun. I love being silly. I like to have a good time and travel and enjoy good food and wine. I think that me as a person, open and willing to growth, committed to growth overall.
It's uncomfortable being vulnerable.
Well, I think vulnerability is one thing. So to me, vulnerability in a business sense might be to say, I don't know the answer to something, or I'm not sure I can complete that task even though I took it on. So to me, that's vulnerability. For me, I'm still working on the journey of identity and not using a professional persona as armor. So I need to kind of take that down as I'm working with people.
I think too, though, that, knowing you as a person, I would have to imagine that your ability to be human and be authentic must also make it a huge draw for people to be able to trust you, because when we know that somebody is authentic, then, and you have that vibe off of them that you can trust them, then that does help to build those relationships even for short periods of time. So I would imagine authenticity is also a big part of the work that you do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have a saying among us facilitators that you have to do the work to do the work. So we need to do as much of it internally and be open and transparent about that in order to expect or facilitate other people on that journey. And so self-awareness is so important in terms of knowing where our strengths and weaknesses. And I mean, you know me, I'm a huge planner. So I mean, I like things structured and planned, but the biggest learning for me is going into a workshop with a new group of people and being willing to let whatever is going to unfold, and knowing that I'm not going to control it. I mean, I may have to temper it a little bit to make sure that we get everything done. But if we need to go down one road to make sure that we're addressing an issue that I haven't foreseen, I have to allow that to happen and honor the space for that.
Well, I would have to think that in this business, that is key to success, that you would understand that no two programs would run the same, because you have different people with different challenges and different obstacles and different needs out of the workshop. So I would have to think that that would make your job very exciting, that every workshop would be something different and you would learn something new from every one of them.
Absolutely. I'm surprised every single time I do them, and that's what I love so much, is that it's allowing me to evolve as well, so that I can make sure that things that really work well can be pulled into other workshops, and the things that kind of maybe fall flat, it's so important to adjust according to your audience. And so I love to see what unfolds, and I love the surprises from that.
Talk to me about the importance of failure as you're doing these workshops and helping companies and people understand that it is okay to fail in their journey.
Interesting. There's some industries where failure is absolutely life and death. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes failure is not okay.
Yeah.
Definitely not, but I think it's how you handle the failure that matters. So it's the, okay, we've failed. How do we now recover from that? How do we, A, make it right, and B, move forward so that that doesn't become our story? I mean, there's been lots of organizations where one large failure becomes their story and they just can't recover from that. And it's usually because they haven't either gone back to make it right, or they have not been transparent in terms of what's been done or what was known in advance, and people aren't taking accountability. So I think failure is a huge lesson, and how you manage it is really what stands in your integrity.
I think that accountability is such a word. I mean, it's become a buzzword in business and in life, but it is so key to the success of any company or any individual, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Even on our personal journey, I mean, nobody's going to get it right all of the time, but it's a matter of, if I mess up, do I come back and make it right, or do I at least try to make it right and say, you know what, that was not good yesterday. I did not show up well yesterday, and I'd like to make it right. What do you need from me?
Sometimes there are situations when you, as an employee, might feel that you just wish your leader, maybe they made a decision that you feel wasn't the right one, but you wish your employer or your boss would say to you, okay, yeah, I did mess up. Like I did make a mistake there. I hear what you're saying. Let's make it right. And I think that that's one of the challenges, is that sometimes, when employees in personal relationships, parents and kids, when you don't feel heard, that can really start to build some irreparable walls in relationships.
Leadership is a tricky balance between consultation in action, right? Because yes, you want to hear voices. Sometimes you have to make a decision, and cut those voices short, because we can't stay in consultation all the time or else things don't move forward. But I think allowing transparency into that process to say, here's the decision I made. I had to make it quickly. Here are the reasons. Here's our opportunity for improvement moving forward, if perhaps that decision didn't get us the results that we needed.
Now, you mentioned the word balance in there, and I think that's another thing that is, from our generation compared to the generation that's up and coming, there's always that tendency to sort of look at the generations that are older than you and younger than you and think that none of them have it right, which, I mean, if you're open, you understand that's not true. But, one of the greatest things I think about this generation that's up and coming is that they are calling for balance. They want a work-life balance. They are asking for the opportunity to have input. They realize that they have options and that they're not necessarily going to stick with one career for the rest of their lives. So that must play a bit of a role in the hierarchy and in leadership and in some of the work that you do, is that you're looking at different generations with, different value systems in some ways.
Yeah, I think that that dynamic will definitely feed into how we relate to one another as colleagues. But I mean, I must be a millennial at heart, because I believe that everybody should feel rewarded and enriched by their career. And I believe that everybody has that right. And, sure, as a younger employee, you might have to build some skill set, but having that expectation, I think, is not a bad thing.
No, it's not unreasonable whatsoever. Now, saying that you want to feel rewarded also could be deemed as subjective. So how do you determine what's rewarding for one person versus what's rewarding for somebody else?
You ask them.
And do you think that's happening enough in business?
No, I think we do a one size fits all. And so, I mean, early on in my leadership journey, that was one of the things that stuck with me in this training session I went to. It was, how do you reward your employees? You ask them. And
it's so
I mean, it's so simple, but, pulling someone up on a stage and giving them an award might be absolutely terrifying for one employee, and yet exactly what another employee might like. So it's so important to just, when you're first joining a team or starting a team up, to ask them, how do you like to be rewarded? How do you like to receive feedback? Do you like public recognition? Do you prefer a private written note? It's such a simple, small thing you can do as a leader, and then you just customize your approach. And of course, you won't be able to meet all of the, like, I'd like a private island getaway to be for my reward, but maybe not in the realm. But how about a day off or something, in terms of leisure time?
Have you ever worked for a company that asked that question?
I have worked for a team where our leader did ask each individual to fill out a form, and it was a group discussion we had later, just to get to know each other. Like, how do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to be acknowledged? And it's a great team building activity and quite easy to do.
When somebody begins one of your workshops, tell me what that would entail. What is it that they'll go through? What kinds of exercises, and what do they do?
Yeah, so each workshop is actually customized to the organization that I'm working with. So what I'll do up front is consult with the leadership in terms of why do you think you want to do this? What is it that you're hoping to get out of it? What are your goals? What are your challenges? What are your objectives? And then I can customize a program based on their specific needs. So there's usually consultation up front to make sure that I'm approaching what they need accordingly. We'll then do some pre-work assessments, and that's where we get that data that helps give us some insight into where some of the challenges and opportunities are. I'll usually then bring that back to the leadership team to say, hey, here's what we've seen, and here's how I recommend that we move forward. So if, for example, we're seeing that people don't think it's important, because that's one of the questions that we ask is, do you believe that courageous leadership is an important skill for our organization? If we're seeing a lot of no's, then we need to get in front of that. And so I would work then with the senior leader to say, okay, we need to build a business case for why we're doing this before we even bring people into a room and get them on board. So that's what they can expect up front. Within the workshops, I make sure that we're managing different learning styles so that if we're training virtually, for example, you want to give your introverts some opportunity to think about things in advance. Maybe they don't want to speak up on camera. Can they type some answers in the chat? So just altering a little bit of the approach. You want to have some self-reflection and a balance with some group discussion or smaller group discussion and exercises to make people engaged. And the one thing that I really think is important to do is after each module or lesson, I say, here's how you can take this back to your team. So yes, we've gone through all of this, but here's a small and simple way that you can take this back to your team, and giving them those tangible tools that they can take back.
This whole COVID situation must have changed the way that your business is operating. I know it's changed everybody else's. Is this an opportunity for improvement in companies, do you think, that we're looking at, more people are working from home? Is it maybe giving people an opportunity to find new and better ways to communicate, or is it sometimes offering even more challenges, or maybe a little bit of all of that?
Oh yeah, you're going to see a lot of it. So there's so many elements that need to be addressed. The main one is psychological safety, and how workers are interpreting what's going on in the world, and do they feel safe? Because that's going to be paramount when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy. Safety is at the bottom of it. So if you're not feeling safe, you're not going to be able to perform or even function in your job. So that's really redirected the attention of leadership and HR professionals in terms of where they need to focus their time. The other thing I love about our current circumstances with COVID is that command and control style leadership just falls to the ground because of that physical distancing. And so there's no more, peering over your employee's desk or shoulder, right? And so we're seeing it show up in different ways in terms of like expecting quick response times or expecting regular check-ins. And the most ridiculous one I heard was a leader who asked all of their employees to sign into Zoom so that they could watch them work. And so we're going to see command and control.
That's shocking.
I couldn't believe it. So we're going to see command and control first get super agitated and start showing some of those behaviors, but they're going to have to embrace trust, or their personal discomfort will just dislodge them.
It would actually be a great opportunity for some of those leaders to access their vulnerability, because that loss of control is going to be incredibly uncomfortable, I would think.
Absolutely. And I think, some will be given the tools by their leadership and HR teams to help them. And others are really going to struggle. I worry about them, because I think that command and control style of leadership is so tied to identity that when that is gone, there might be a little bit of identity crisis there. And so there needs to be support for those leaders to learn a new way and a better way.
Going back to that balance, what you said just reminded me of something that I remember reading years ago, that as human beings, we need to learn that anything we have that can be taken away from us, whether it's our looks or our money or our position in a company, anything that can be taken away from us should not be the thing that we use to identify who we are. And I would think that sometimes that can become a struggle in business, and some of the companies that you're working with is, when you're too tightly tied to your position, perhaps that ends up actually handcuffing you and preventing you from moving forward, or from that success. That, I don't want to say vanity, I'm not trying to be harsh about it, but if you can't let go of that, then that, I think, could be a huge impediment to your ability to move forward and to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we aim to do is give them new things to tie against, and that's things like integrity. You can't take that away from somebody. Accountability, you can't take that away from somebody, right? Self-compassion, empathy, those are all the things that can't be taken away. And when you're tied to them, you're going to have that inner strength that all of those external circumstances will fall to the side when you tie onto things like that.
Do you find that it's difficult for people to admit when they need help in business? Do you find that for employees and for leaders, is it difficult for them to say, I'm looking, to me, this would come back to fear, but I'm faced with this problem. I'm faced with this project. I don't know if I know enough to get it done. Do you find that sometimes that's a challenge within companies, that employees don't feel safe coming forward and saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest barriers to courage in the workplace, is being fearful of saying I don't know, or I don't have all the answers. And yet it's one of the most powerful things you can do to move forward. And it also builds trust. So, if I'm a leader delegating a task to an employee, the way that I'm going to trust them is when they come back and say, you know what, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if I can do this, versus pretending they can take it on, struggling all the way, and then coming back on deadline to say, I totally messed this up.
I think there's great hope for our future. And especially when businesses and people can come to somebody like you and companies like yours and evolve and grow and not feel uncomfortable or feel ashamed that they need to learn that they have room to grow.
Funny you mentioned shame, because that's another thing that we explore, right? And how many people talk about shame at work, but when you look at how shame shows up at work, it's things like perfectionism, it's things like action bias, where moving forward is more important than examining what's maybe gone wrong. So yeah, shame is a big part of it, and we open the door to shame and create a safe place to explore that as well.
So tell me a little bit about, I'm going into more of a personal realm, but tell me a little bit about, again, I have the advantage of knowing your family life. How did your upbringing play into your decision to move into this field? Did it have any role?
I don't think so. I think I was born ambitious. I remember wanting to be a lawyer at the age of 9. I remember wanting to contribute. Contribution is one of my core values, and so feeling like I'm contributing to make the world a better place is important to me. And so getting into leadership development wasn't a clear line or path for me. I've had lots of stumbles and diversions along the way, but anchoring to what I'm passionate about and what I feel like I do well at are things that kind of guide my journey. And so I think that focus on contribution and my aspirational nature have both led me to where I am today.
I would say, coming from an outsider perspective, but with some insight, I would also say that you're selling yourself a little bit short on the tenacity that you have, because it is true that your pathway didn't go in the direction that you thought it would, but that didn't ever stop you from continuing to try to find the pathway. You were able to be honest enough with yourself to say, maybe that isn't the pathway that I really want. Maybe I want it for reasons that aren't true to who I am. And you allowed yourself, I look at it like a stick on the river. You can throw a stick on the river and it's going to just flow with the river and get to where it needs to be. And that's sort of how I look at your journey. You didn't fight it. You didn't try and get to somewhere insisting that what your original thought was the correct one. You allowed yourself to grow and to just let go and to float and to get to where you needed to be. And that takes an incredible amount of courage and tenacity in order to do what you've done, I think, because sometimes it's hard for people to change gears or to accept that they're not going to be on the pathway that they originally thought they were going to be. So I think that you need to give yourself credit, because that's a huge testament to your character.
Thank you. It didn't feel like floating at the time.
No, it often doesn't,
it felt
does
like,
it?
it felt like getting stuck in rocks and mud and bloody and beaten a little bit at times. But I think the hunger is what remains, the hunger to contribute. And I think if you anchor to that, I'm still learning the balance between when do you keep trying versus when do you just release and let go because it's not serving you? And so that's something I continue to learn. And maybe I spent too much time focusing on one thing versus another.
I heard the interview you did with Katie, and you guys talked about that, and you present that to her about how do you know when you're, beating your head against a wall versus, I just think it's so wise, because sometimes we do have to just learn to take a moment and just look around and see, do I really want to go through that wall? Am I better to go around it? Am I better to turn around and go in a different direction? And that's some of the most vulnerable I think we have to be as human beings in business.
Yeah. Or do I need to just lay down and take a nap?
Yeah. Which I don't think any of us do enough of in this
We
life.
sometimes forget that self-care. Yeah.
So just to conclude, Laura, when you're looking at, if you had to give the elevator pitch of your business and what your company can do for people, give that to me now.
I mean, if I were to sum it up, what I would say is that I bring authentic connection to the workplace. As simple as that.
And the only way to get there, I guess, would be through people. I mean, you have to be able to allow people to be the conduit for that authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about people, for sure. Yeah. I'm bringing our whole selves. And that's the other great thing that COVID has done, is it's thrust our entire life into the realm of work. And so we've got people chasing around toddlers, and we have dogs barking, and we have, people working at their kitchen table. And so it has forced us to embrace the whole human that comes to work. And I think that's also been a positive thing.
If you had to make a prediction, I'm putting you on the spot, but if you had to make a prediction about how COVID might change the workplace moving forward, what would you suggest is going to happen?
Well, I think there's probably more of a focus on mental wellness, mental health. I think there is also a more focus around flexibility and agility. And I think also that given the race crisis that has gone on parallel to this, the discussion for diversity, inclusion, and belonging is no longer lip service. Organizations are putting real resources to making that a priority, which I think is another great thing.
It's so fascinating. My daughter had, as we were doing some schoolwork, she had a question that came up and about, right at the beginning of the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And, at 11 years old, she was able to come up with the obvious that, because I was saying to her, we read through the assignment and the story, and I said, this has been going on for so long, these discussions, and people have been demanding change. Why do you think that so many people are listening right now? And she just summed it up and said, because the world has stopped and it has time to listen. And it's like, isn't that the truth? And thank goodness,
Very
it's
wise.
so long overdue that people can finally be heard. And you just hope and pray that, the messages will be absorbed and that finally some change will happen so that the world can become a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for letting me put you in the vulnerable hot seat for today and for sharing everything. I didn't tell any bad stories. I promised you I wouldn't. So that's for another podcast or another video.
Thank you so much. Yeah, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jodi.